The Illuminate Arts and Faith Conference in Chattanooga, Tennessee wants to help you find your tribe. Do you get way too excited about quoting Wendell Berry or C.S. Lewis in conversations with coworkers? Does your Spotify playlist include hymns, a little jazz, and a whole lot of Andrew Peterson? Join your tribe at Illuminate March 31 and April 1 for education and inspiration from speakers Russ Ramsey, Douglas McKelvey, John Hendricks, and others. Find a complete list of session topics and ticket information at southern.edu/illuminate.
In 2024, I set out to meet as many poets as I could and spend an hour with each one. I got more than I bargained for, more insight, more clarity, more hope. It's proved to be one of the richest highlights of my life. 17 writers, 17 deeply human conversations that made me sit up and pay attention. Franz Kafka once said, if the book we're reading doesn't wake us up with a blow to the head, what are we reading for? A book must be the axe for the frozen sea within us. And that's what I hope this new book will do. I hope it wakes us up, my friends. I hope these conversations will be the catalyst for something to be reawakened, re-enchanted, and reinvigorated. It's called An Axe for the Frozen Sea, Conversations with Poets About What Matters Most. I'm Ben Palpin, and I hope you'll come and listen in as I spend a little time with poets like Lucy Shaw, Malcolm Guite, Dana Gioia, and Lee Young Lee. Pull up a chair at the table as we dig into what it means to write well and to live well. An Axe for the Frozen Sea is now available from Rabbit Room Press. Visit the store at rabbitroom.com, or better yet, ask about it at your favorite bookseller.
Hey friends, Jonathan Rogers here. Before we get started, I wanted to mention a new online writing class that I've put together. It's called Writing with Hobbits. Over 6 weeks, starting August 18th, we'll read The Hobbit together, and we'll talk about the principles by which Tolkien works his particular kind of magic as a writer. Then we'll apply those principles to our own writing. I'd love to see you there. Find out more at thehabit.co/hobbits. Welcome to the Habit Podcast, conversations with writers about writing. I'm Jonathan Rogers, your host. Sandra McCracken is a singer-songwriter in Nashville. Her songs and her singing have been a kind of ballast for me for 20 years. She sings like a person who has come through the valley of the shadow and rejoices all the more in the great light. Sandra McCracken was a founding member of Indelible Grace Music. She's a part of Rain for Roots. If you have kids, I hope you know about that. She's also written for the Gospel Coalition and Christianity Today. She just got a lot going on. I think you're going to love hearing what Sandra McCracken has to say. Sandra McCracken, thank you so much for being on the Habit Podcast with me today.
Thanks so much, Jonathan. Good to be with you.
You know, when I think about what your music has meant to me through the years, I think about formation. I first became familiar with your name and your singing through
Indelible Grace?
Indelible Grace, that's it. Yeah. And which has been so, it was 20 years ago at least when the first one came out, I think.
Yeah.
And those, so in case some listeners don't know what I'm talking about, this is a project that started, Kevin Twitt started over at, when he was, I guess he still is at Belmont, and taking old hymns and, well, maybe you may do a better job of explaining what Indelible Grace is.
So it is, when I first came to, I came to Belmont. I met Kevin when I was in St. Louis, actually. So he was the only person I knew in Nashville when I moved here.
Really?
And my first friend here. And we both loved old hymns. RUF, Reform University Fellowship, was like a college ministry that Kevin ended up being really key in and still works with college students there at Belmont. And so when I was coming through college, man, it was such a new thing to be in an environment like in a dorm and having these Bible studies and playing 8 verses of old hymns with an acoustic guitar. Some of them were still traditional tunes, but in that process, Kevin would just cultivate this creative process of like taking an old hymnal with songs and poems that are out of circulation and adding new melodies to them. So yeah, it's that. I mean, some people call it retuned hymns or lots of different names for it, but it's this unique blend of old and new.
Yeah, I was starting to say before I got off on the history of Indelible Grace that in those 20 years, those hymns have been very formative for me. I mean, many of them, some of them I knew, a lot of them I knew, but a lot of them I didn't. And of course, Kevin has a lot to say about how hymns form people. And then I know you do Rain for Roots for little people, which is very much about formation, right? I mean, I think that's. And I was just curious, what do you think in terms of form? I'm making this music for the purpose of formation. Is that something you think about?
I think it's really important. There are seasons where we have the luxury, like seasons in your life where you have the luxury of digging in and kind of absorbing all of that, studying the theology, memorizing the scripture. And then there are other seasons that you really don't have that luxury, whether you have young children or you're in an academic program or whatever. There are times, and then you go through crisis or, transition, and you have this formation that you rest on. It's like a net that holds you in those times. So I think on one hand, I think the formation was probably, I was the recipient of formation. So as a young kid, both my mom and our church, so many different ways of learning and studying words and scripture that has been with me and has been part of that formation. So when songwriting for me is the vocational part, and as that's my vocation, so it would apply to no matter what your vocation is, right? So if you're in whatever field of work, that formation that's happening through discipleship, through being in the Word, then comes out in 1,000 different ways in the work that you do. So for us, it was songwriting. And I think for Kevin, it was even songwriting because he was both a pastor and a musician. And that was a tremendous influence on us as a community as we were coming through college. Yeah.
And then, I think about a song like, We Will Feast in the House of Zion, which to me feels formative and has been formative for me, even though you'd think I'd be formed at this point, as old as I am, but I'm not fully formed. And that song helps form my desires and my longings, We Will Feast in the House. I mean, the way that it brings a future grace into the present, I guess when I think about that song, I think about the power of a song to shape our desires and to give us something to long for. I think it's so. That's not a question. That's a.
Yeah, I'm with you. I think there's something in that you're talking about where a song or a piece of art would give us a sense of imagination that's not just imagination like Disneyland, but that's gospel imagination that takes us into like deeper into those promises of okay, if this is true, then how does it change everything? How does it change where we are now? And I need that too. I mean, even writing a song like that, writing those words, and then having, that song following me around all these years, it's like, I forget it, and then I sing it again, and then it becomes new for me, and I need that. Another song like that is a song called Steadfast, which is from Psalm 133. And there have been so many times that I've started a set of music or a performance, and with those words, I will build my house, weather, storm, or drought, on the rock that does not move. Because most of the time my emotions are like all over the place, but if I sing that line, I just I have to come back and submit to it again.
Yeah. Yeah, I know. I feel like so often when we, and this isn't just true for songwriting, it's true for all kinds of writing, that we, when you write, you sit down and you have, just by virtue of the concentration that you're putting into your work, you see truth that hopefully you're writing it for other people. But then later, when you come back to it later in life, as you said, when your circumstances have changed or whatever, you it's like you're reading something that somebody else wrote. It was another version of yourself that wrote it. And it was a version of yourself that had time to really ponder what's really true, whereas a lot of the times we don't.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I was talking with a friend the other day about how the Spirit of God works over the course of our lives in this, like, it's like a cumulative. It is building on itself, to where He will bring something to light in our lives and in our spirit, and then He'll bring it up again, and then He'll bring it up again. And it's just like it's not that we forget it entirely, but we need those kind of building blocks, those reminders, those like plot points that would say, okay, we've made it this far. I love that passage. It says, all the way that you have gone until now, the Lord has carried you. Like the Lord your God has carried you as a father carries his son. And there's this sense of these reminders are part of that being carried. And music has kind of a strange, mysterious way of doing that. And I don't know that I have any mastery over what that means or how to do that, but it sure is fun to be part of it.
Yeah, right. In the little intro to I saw a video that you did with a little intro to God's Highway.
Mm-hmm.
You talk about working with. Did you write that song with Thad Cockrell?
I did, yeah.
And you were talking about Thad and how you were trying to describe the sort of struggles that you're in the middle of right then,
mm-hmm.
and Thad encouraged you instead to instead of my feet are tired, my feet are strong, my
eyes are clear. Like I felt like I was in a fog, and I was trying to describe that as a songwriter, and he was like, no, think about how the spirituals carry us forward. They don't sing about right where you are, they sing about where you're going. And I think that was the invitation into gospel imagination for me. And it changed, the poetry of the song. And it's, it sure makes that song something that I would come back to for that reason, Yeah.
I mean, the one thing I was thinking about as I was hearing that story was, you started with introspection, which I think is, an important part of the process. But what made that song work was when you got out of introspection and you went to something else.
That's right. And that's a good point. I think introspection, it kind of goes hand in hand with lament. So the Psalms also do that very well. The Psalms do introspection. They would give us permission to explore some of the more, what we would think of as like negative emotions. And I do think that there's a place for those in worship. I think like the hymn writers would tell us that we have permission to sing that on a Sunday morning too, Ann Steele or Isaac Watts or, some of my favorites where there's clearly like an emotional honesty that you start with, and then and then you work through that. And I was just thinking about that the other day with the song God's Highway, and then I have a new song coming out this week. Actually, it's called You Are With Me, and I wrote that with Leslie Jordan. And that one, the verses really do describe like the fatigue and the this is like an anthem for 2020, but the chorus is you are with me, you are for me, you've been behind me, you go before me. I mean, there is an affirmation of what's true, and there's also an acknowledgement of the introspection of where we are and like looking honestly at that. I guess having that whole dynamic range is, I would say that's really important, and sometimes we miss out on it.
Yeah. I love the idea of, for a writer, thinking in terms of there are things that are true and there are things that are truer. And, hopefully you're moving toward what's truer. And your struggle and your heartache and the fog, that's true enough. There's no reason, there's no sense in saying that's not true. It is true.
Right.
It's just not the truest thing about you. And I do feel, but my favorite songs of yours are the songs that move us in that, that sort of have that movement, So
Thank
thanks for
you.
doing that.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, what do you think about that as a writer, the balance between introspection? I mean, you think about Flannery O'Connor, or the willingness to go all the way in, to, I mean, we're using the word introspection, but it's like the shadow of things. And to tell the whole story, you kind of have to go there, right?
Yeah.
And then you have to, kind of sit in it and then move through it, that it's not the end point, that the thing we're glorifying is not the emotion, it's the truth.
Yeah. When I teach writing, I feel like I'm spending a lot of time encouraging people to look out instead of looking in. Not because the main reason is I think you don't have to tell many writers to look within. Right? that comes natural. If you weren't sort of an introspective person, you wouldn't be writing in the first place. And so I feel like, as a corrective, I'm always trying to push people to look at not what's going on between their ears, but what's going on outside.
Yeah.
But only as a corrective, right? If I knew somebody who never looked inside and was trying to be a writer, I would say, hey, try being a little more introspective. But I don't feel like I really need to. I mean, it's like the advice. People are always giving writers the advice of make sure you do a lot of reading. I'm like, who needs to tell writers to read more? It's like telling a teenage boy, make sure you eat 3 meals a day and a couple of snacks.
Yeah. It's case by case, right? And that is true. Do you find that, this is kind of an aside, but do you find that it's harder or easier during this time of stay at home to read more or to concentrate on things like that? I've been asking people that.
I'm not sure it's any, I've been surprised that it's not any easier.
Yeah, me too. In the beginning, I was so excited about that.
I know. I have had more just because I've had more time, but I haven't. Whatever percentage of extra time I haven't had that much extra reading. Right.
Yeah.
So if I've got 30% more time, I've only done 10% more reading, something like that. Okay. I'm making up these statistics.
No, that's good. I appreciate that.
How about you? Have you been reading more?
Yeah, but I think there's some surprising, I'm surprisingly distracted during this time where there's so much space, Yeah. It's it's a real discipline to finish a book or to, not get pulled. And I mean, and some of that's even just being at home. There's so much to do at home, you just think, when you're out or you're at an office or you're in those grooves that we're so used to being in. I think it really causes us to have to rethink all of our priorities. Yeah.
Now, on the other hand, so I have found it a little harder to write during this time than usual. And however, I've been so much more aware of what's going on in my yard. I mean, more gardening, more, paying more attention to birds, and I think that's going to bear fruit.
I'm so glad to hear that. Yeah, I think that's true. Being outside and being together with other people outside too, because that's the way by which we're connecting, and that's very unique to this time.
Yeah. Can we talk about the new creation a little bit? Okay. I know, from your connection with Arosha, I know you're interested in the old creation a lot, but the new creation as well. Can you talk to me about how that shapes the way you think about how and why you do your work?
That's a big question. And so I will avoid a theological answer and just kind of say, just this morning or today, when I'm hearing that question, I think of Psalm 104, and I think of God's, his governing over all things. And then I think about, if you watch a National Geographic special or flip through the magazine, there's so much inherent cruelty in our experience of creation now, right? It's hard not to, it's important, I think, to pay attention to that. So when I think of new creation, I think of we will not need to lament the cruelty of things as they are. There'll be wholeness even to the cycles and to the way that, yes, that God is providing for all of us. And there is the cycle of life. The omnivore's dilemma. Like, there are all these things to converse about as far as our food and our use of the land in the old creation, I guess you would say. But when I think of the new creation, I think my hope is that even there, we are looking ahead to a day where this will have wholeness and there won't be a need to lament or to experience pain or suffering or tears. Because it's so, it's not only our personal story, it's the creation story too. And from that passage in Romans where the creation groans in expectation, that, there is a longing that when we have our own personal longings, we are echoing something that's already going on around us. So we participate in something that's larger than ourselves. And I guess going back to what you said about looking outward, that's a way that I have found it very helpful to look outward as someone who's more inclined to look at myself when I step out in the woods or out west and the sky is really big. And there are just reminders in that we are part of something much bigger than ourselves.
Yeah. Yeah. That's such an important idea that I think one thing that a writer of any kind is doing for readers they care about is placing their story within a bigger story. Saying to the reader, to the listener, whatever your story is, it's part of something bigger.
Yeah, that's true. And we're drawn to characters in writing that not only help us find ourselves, but to enlarge our empathy for each other. I think Les Miserables. That's one of my favorite stories. We were just talking about it yesterday. And I think that the dynamics of those stories and how interwoven all the characters are, some of the greatest stories remind us of that connectedness.
Yeah. Pete Peterson talks about stories as signposts to the new creation. I don't know that I don't suppose he originated that idea, but he talks about it in any case. And again, I think that's one of the things I love about what you do. It feels like these signposts to a kingdom that's coming, but it's here and all all that. And I do think that's such an important. I don't know where I'm going with that, but it's the idea of the new creation and giving readers and listeners a vision of what, again, where we fit into a story that turns out to be a comedy. It looks like a tragedy from where we sit, but it turns out to be a comedy.
Yeah, and I think if we are paying attention to the scripture and seeing that this new kingdom is actually going to be manifest right where we are, there's a lot that shifts for me around that. So, in other words, heaven's not just out there and it's just like little cherubs on harps and, but that there's this renewal that we talk about. It really does change the work that we're doing now because all of our participation in that is meaningful toward that new kingdom coming.
Yeah. So you are working on a book now.
Yes.
Is this the first time you've ever?
Yes,
so
it is. It is.
You don't have any unpublished books out there.
No. In fact, I've been really shy about it in a way because I've done songwriting for my whole life, basically. And that feels comfortable to me. That's something that I understand and I can move in and out of. But thinking of myself as a writer is something that I've always kind of held at a distance. And I have tried to practice it and to do more of it. But this is the first time I've ever said yes to something of this volume. So working on a book, and this has been providentially a good year for it with time off the road, and I just finished an album that's coming out in October, and I found that it was actually really difficult to do both. So I shifted into music, and from March through just this last month, finishing up an album and now kind of digging headlong into the writing. So yeah, I'm trying to push that forward and hope to have it hope to have a good draft of it by the end of the year.
Oh, great. And so, tell me about that making that shift from writing songs to writing a book-length manuscript.
There's a documentary out, Joni Mitchell, talking about her life, and she's also a painter, as you may know. Like, she did both the songwriter and did a lot of her own cover artwork and self-portraits. But she talks about the season of going from recording an album to painting as crop rotation. So she'd put one thing down and pick something else up. So it's a little bit like that, and trying to shift into something else just feels like letting one thing rest. And I can feel that shift where I don't really need to write songs right this minute, and I can take a little breather from that. And trying to be more disciplined with just sitting at the computer for writing, and to close everything out, everything else, shut down the email so I can focus.
All right. Yeah. So, I don't write songs. From where I sit, it feels like it would be the difference between running sprints and sort of going on a long jog. Is that a fair, is that the way it feels to you, or is that, like I said, this is my totally my imagination?
No, that's good. That's a good question. I maybe I could probably let you know in 6 months if it feels like that. I think some songs come very quickly. For me, it's probably just the familiarity with the craft. So whereas I feel the comfort level of songs because I've done that for so long, and then with the writing, the self-doubt that comes in when I sit down to write something that's a long chapter is something that I have to wrestle with. It's more like, okay, I just wrote this whole thing. I don't know if it matters at all. It's that question of self-doubt that comes in right after that is probably the biggest obstacle in the writing.
Just because you feel like you've had enough experience with songwriting to feel like what's good and what isn't, and
that's probably it. Like, I can still write bad songs, but I can identify them pretty quickly. So those still happen regularly too. But maybe just the confidence around it. Confidence is a big thing in terms of whatever your work is. And it's not something we talk a lot about in church circles. I don't know why. Is that funny? I don't know. But I've been pondering it a lot, and that there is a very strong case to be made that confidence is part of how we're wired to flourish and to do the things we're made to do.
I want to hear more about that. Confidence is a part of I think I think that's exactly right. I've never thought about it before. Confidence and flourishing.
Yeah.
So, the floor is now open, Sandra, for you to say.
I don't know. I think I have more questions than answers. But when I think about flourishing, I think about acknowledging our limitations. And when we acknowledge the limitations, you can actually flourish within the space you're given. The boundaries are, set around us to where, like if you're teaching writing, is it like that? Where if you give parameters, it's just so much easier to write within parameters, right?
Absolutely. My students can't, if I say, hey, just write whatever you feel like it.
Yeah.
Just wait for the extension request to start coming in.
Yes.
But one thing I love about the way you're framing confidence is, or the way you first framed it was, I know when I've done something that's not any good.
I think you're absolutely right. I think about one of the, like a personality thing that I've thought about over the years is just like, what is the difference between humility, false humility? Like genuine humility is the ability to say, hey, this is good. I'm proud of this. without having to play up the kind of the aw shucks of like, oh, really? I mean,
Right.
and I think some of that's just temperament. Some of it is Southern culture that has been, I've been swimming in those waters for a long time. And I think that confidence growth in that is a way of moving forward. And it's so important as we learn to give, what we've learned and everything that we're holding in our hands to the next, hand it over to somebody else. Like we keep handing this on.
Yeah.
So I don't know, but you got to know what it is you're holding to be able to give it to the next person to share it.
We have a friend who'll show up every now and then and say, I made this chocolate cake. It's amazing. You got to have some. Yes.
That's it.
What I'm about. Yeah,
That is
that's
exactly
what we're all
it.
shooting for.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And there's like a little bit of it, like you can stand outside of yourself. There's a sense of looking outward enough to be able to say, that chocolate cake is really good. I really enjoyed making it.
Yeah. I enjoy making it. It doesn't necessarily make me a genius or a brilliant, but I made I made this great chocolate cake. It's just this thing that's good, and I want to share it.
Let's celebrate it. Mm-hmm.
And for some reason in the arts, we somehow we don't have the same distance from the chocolate cake that we have with the things that we feel like have come out of our brains or whatever.
Yeah.
To say, here's a song I wrote, and you're gonna love it.
Yeah. And I think that probably goes hand in hand with the way we experience like social media and the way that there's, as an artist, that there's this like unnecessary, like you share it. You are presenting the chocolate cake like kind of every day, all the time through social media or through whatever you're doing to promote the work. And I know that feels real weird for me and a lot of other artists, but it's also, there's a way to do it that's authentic and that's celebratory and that's grateful, knowing that we're given gifts and we're given those to build each other up.
Yeah, right. We're given gifts not for ourselves, but for others. And,
yeah.
And also to a certain extent for ourselves. I mean, just to to enjoy. I mean that phrase "enjoying ourselves."
Yeah.
Is to enjoy yourself and not just.
Yeah.
I don't know that this is an interesting phrase, enjoying yourself.
I mean, it is funny that that makes me think about just that Jesus' command to love the Lord your God, and just this idea of like loving others as you love yourself, because it's implied that we're already going to do that.
Yeah, right. Well, okay, Sandra, I always end these conversations with this question.
Okay.
Who are the writers who make you want to write?
I like that question. I have a stack of books right now, and I'm trying to. Okay. Who are the writers that make me want to write? I would say Flannery O'Connor. Currently, I'm reading Ronald Reuelhauser, and I'm reading a Rich Mullins book, which has been a little while since I've thought about that.
A book by or about?
It's the one that was actually written by, let's see, pull it here, James Bryan Smith. So this is the one that's like all these narrative published writings that just kind of explore his life and story. Of course, C.S. Lewis. I know that's like such a cliche, but every time I go back to Lewis, there's just so much there, and his nonfiction especially. I mean, I think his storytelling is brilliant, but there's so many ways that he describes things. I have A Grief Observed on my bedside table just because it's such beautiful question asking, and I have an old tattered copy that I just pick up and read a few a few paragraphs, and just love it. So. Yeah, that's a good starting list for now. I need to read more fiction. I need to revisit Gilead. That's on my list.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You better revisit it soon because there's another one in the series coming out in September.
That's right. That's right. And you've had some. How do you say his name? Leif.
Leif Inger.
Leif Inger. Yeah. I think Peace Like a River was one of my favorites.
Yeah.
And really enjoyed your conversation with him too. By the way.
What a sweet guy.
Yeah.
Well, great. Well, Sandra, thank you for
thanks so much.
This much time to talk to me.
It's my pleasure. Thank you.
Talk again soon.
All right.
All right.
We'll do it. Take care.
The Rabbit Room has partnered with Lipscomb University to make this podcast possible. Lipscomb has graciously given us access to their recording studio in the Center for Entertainment and Arts building. We're so grateful for their sponsorship, their encouragement, and the good work they do in Nashville. Special shout out as well to Jess Ray for letting us use her song Too Good as part of this podcast. Visit jessraymusic.com to hear more of her beautiful songs.
The Habit membership is a library of resources for writers by me, Jonathan Rogers. More importantly, The Habit is a hub of community where like-minded writers gather to discuss their work and give each other a little more courage. Find out more at thehabit.co.
This podcast was produced by The Rabbit Room, where art nourishes community and community nourishes art. All our podcasts are made possible by the generous support of our members. To learn more about us, visit rabbitroom.com, and to become a member, rabbitroom.com/donate.
If you've enjoyed this podcast episode, consider joining the Rabbit Room membership. Your membership helps sustain this community, funding everything from publishing and podcasts and theater productions to events and programs that support artists who create with a Christ-centered vision. We'd love to have you on board. Learn more at rabbitroom.com/member.